How to get rich in every time period. Not too long ago, I made a video about what it was like to be rich in every time period, and you guys really liked that video. In that video, I talked about the experiences and the lifestyle of wealthy people in every time period, and only briefly touched on how that wealth was typically acquired. But in this video, I wanted to provide some perspective on how wealth could be made and how you could get rich in every time period. Let's get started. The Stone Age. This segment is likely going to be the most wholesome on the entire list, and that's just because the Stone Age was a simpler time. Genuinely, not many things were required to be wealthy, and the concept of being rich or wealthy didn't even exist. In the Stone Age, simply surviving was hard enough. So if you miraculously survived childbirth and somehow survived the brutality of a Stone Age childhood, you were already essentially a billionaire. And everything even remotely close to wealth had to do directly with your survivability. That meant food, shelter, water, were your livelihood, and in turn, your wealth. So now that we understand that the modern concept of wealth simply doesn't apply here, what does wealth look like in the Stone Age, and how could you acquire it? Let's start from the beginning. Like I mentioned earlier, to be wealthy, you first need to be alive. And that means the basis of our wealth will be our life. And as a baby, our life is in the hands of our parents. So the original rich babies or boss babies or Nepo babies were simply kids that were lucky enough to have parents that didn't die during childbirth or didn't accidentally kill them or allow them to be killed in their likely harsh environment. Already, this is making me realize how much we take for granted. Next up, assuming your parents care about you, survived childbirth, don't plan on killing you, and are healthy, fit, and able to provide for you properly, you will be able to experience childhood the Stone Age way, which is basically just Minecraft, but not a game, just a reality. Now, assuming you survived your entire childhood and adolescence, you are now an adult in the Stone Age on your own, looking to build wealth for yourself. And by that, I mean literally just survive. I'm really stressing this point because it is extremely important to consider that simply surviving up until this point is a major achievement and basically the equivalent of being handed a $100 million trust fund as soon as you turn 18. But now in this hypothetical scenario, when you are alive, healthy, and on your own, what do you do next? Unfortunately, there is no online business or jobs, and if you want something, you have to go get it. Literally. The first thing you would need to get is food, which is the first and likely primary pillar of wealth in the Stone Age, a steady supply of food. Being on land that was fertile, not only for yourself but for animals, directly impacted your likelihood of survival, and therefore, your wealth. If you lived in the right biome, nature would provide for you, as long as you were a semi-skilled hunter and in tune with your environment. However, the wrong biome would leave you starved and dehydrated in only a matter of days. This directly ties into the next pillar of wealth, which I'll combine two separate parts into one: location and shelter. Of course, food is essential for life and, in this case, wealth. But like we discussed, to have this steady source of food, you must have a conducive environment, which in itself is a form of wealth. But I kind of already made that point, so without repeating myself, let's discuss the second part of this: shelter. Depending on what part of the Stone Age we're talking about, because it does go pretty far back, a lot of shelters were more or less natural, with the most common being a cave, hence the term caveman. If you wanted to be rich, and I mean ultra rich, you lived on land that provided you food and also had shelter that was ready for you to move right in. Consider this prime real estate. This is the prehistoric equivalent of moving into a condo that has a restaurant on the main floor. It's everything you need all in one place. Well, almost everything. We're still missing an essential component, which is the third pillar, that being water. You now have your prime real estate. You have your cave. You have your wild berries growing outside your cave apartment, and you have a steady flow of cute critters that you stomp on and eat on a daily basis. But the last thing to make you a true bajillionaire is to have a steady stream of fresh water, ideally trickling right through a stream right outside of your cave. Without water, shelter and food is almost useless because you won't be around long to enjoy it. So this supply of water is the perfect trifecta for your life and, in this case, your wealth. But it's a bit boring if we end there. What's wealth without a bit of legacy? And maybe someone to share it with. Just because living was hard enough in the Stone Age doesn't mean that there wasn't additional luxuries you could indulge in. And for this example, let's pick our bonuses. I have my cave, I have my food, I have my water. What am I missing? I'd say a cave woman to spend my days with and unga bunga with at night. And with your partner by your side, you're now able to continue your legacy, have Caveman Jr., and ideally allow them to inherit your success. And by that I mean your cave doesn't get raided, the stream doesn't dry up, and the animals don't migrate elsewhere. And spoiler alert, those are all going to happen. And all of your hard work is basically null and void because everything that you had to go through to build your wealth and literally survive is going to have to be done entirely from scratch once again by your children. I think I've made it crystal clear that wealth in the Stone Age is simply being alive. So to answer the question, how do you get rich in the Stone Age? You just don't die. The Bronze Age. No, not the guy that plays for the Lakers, the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is really a landmark in terms of human development, and as we'll see in this segment, there are many changes between humans and wealth in the Stone Age and the Bronze Age. For starters, the Bronze Age is a much more concentrated timeline. The Stone Age, for example, literally goes on for millions of years, whereas the Bronze Age is roughly 2,000 years in total. Don't allow this relatively short timeline to fool you. The amount of development that took place during this era was rapid and impactful. Some major differences right off the bat between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age is that people began to settle. In the Stone Age, a lot of people were nomadic, similar to animals, going where the resources were, as typically ideal locations didn't last very long. But with the introduction of agriculture and other advanced survival techniques, people were able to settle in locations that were deemed ideal. One major difference between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age that was spawned out of settlements were possessions. Because when you are nomadic, you're not able to carry much with you, and for that reason, you didn't own much. On the contrary, when you have a place to call your own, you're able to start collecting a thing or two. And from that, begin to store value and ultimately accumulate wealth. Besides this, we are seeing early coinage, and with this, early commerce as well, which will serve as the foundation for how we measure wealth for the rest of the video. With developed skills, new tools, larger settlements, and early coinage, it's not hard to believe that trade was essentially inevitable. What did they trade, you may ask? Well, everything, but most importantly, bronze. And although settlements and trade are developing, it doesn't necessarily mean that life was all of a sudden easy at this point. Life was still difficult, and every skill and piece of luck required to survive in the Stone Age is still required now. But for the sake of this video, we're gonna assume this is more or less of a given, so we can focus on the specifics of what made you rich in the Bronze Age. Like we mentioned in the last video, during the Bronze Age, wealth began to be associated with the control and production of bronze, which is a valuable metal that is made from copper and tin. Being rich meant you had access to metal ores and the knowledge required to craft tools, weapons, and ornaments, which were things that everybody needed. Maybe not the ornaments, but tools and weapons definitely. Like I mentioned, with settlements growing, trade became more prominent, both inside of settlements and also between settlements via established trade routes. And if you were someone who was able to take advantage of these trade routes, you could significantly enhance your wealth. Besides commerce, another way to gain money and power was through social status, which started to become more of an important thing during this time period. During this time, chiefs and leaders would amass their wealth through the people that they ruled, whether they had full control over the tribe's resources or they simply took contributions from each of their people. Now that we have a bit more context on the Bronze Age and what exactly wealth looked like in the Bronze Age, how could you get rich? For the sake of simplicity, let's assume that you had a great upbringing. Your parents were alive and you survived, and now you're 18 years old looking to build your life and become wealthy in the Bronze Age. Like I mentioned, you ultimately have two primary options. One is to become a merchant, or two, become a leader. We'll touch on both of these. Starting with becoming a merchant, the control and manufacturing of copper was a booming industry. So if I were planning to get rich, I would definitely start there. The first thing I would do is start looking for copper. I would make my wood and maybe even stone pickaxe and get straight to the mines, looking for any copper deposits I could find. Now, this isn't obviously the only way you could gain wealth. I think a better way to gain wealth in the Bronze Age is to become an artisan, specifically making the best type of either tool, weapon, or ornament. For this example, let's say that we want to make the best sword possible. In this case, I would go to a blacksmith and immediately beg them for their knowledge. I don't care if I was unpaid. I don't care if I was like SpongeBob with the Krusty Krab and I had to pay to work there. I would be getting my hours in at the blacksmith so I could hone in my skills on making the best swords possible. Why would I do that? Well, if I could make the best swords and gain a reputation as the guy who makes the best swords, which would hopefully be my official title, I would hope to potentially make a name for myself and ideally catch the attention of the powers that be. Because you know who needs swords? The troops. And you know who wants their troops to win battles? Leaders. And you know who has all of the money? Also leaders. For the most part. I think you see where I'm going here. That's just one example, but if you were doing anything valuable related to copper, chances are you were able to make a few shillings for yourself. But let's just say for this example, you weren't very inclined to mine or craft. And in that example, I would recommend you go the route of leadership. How would I go about that? I would first identify the powers at be. You could try to assassinate him and hopefully fill the power vacuum, but I think that the likelihood of that working out are low. This would definitely be a slow grind, but if you're willing to put in the time and you're charismatic enough, I think it could work. I would get as close as possible as I could to the leader, maybe potentially offering to be some sort of servant. At this point, I would do my absolute best to gain their trust, gain their respect, and ideally become someone that they consider to be a friend. Through this relationship, I would prove that my ideas were worthy and that I potentially had the skills to be a leader, without ever, of course, showing up the leader himself. At this point, over time, I would wait for opportunities to arise where I could potentially fill voids where leadership was needed or ideas were required. And hopefully, through my connection to the actual leader, I could become a person of power myself and benefiting from that sweet, sweet Bronze Age nepotism. Now, in reality, were people in the Bronze Age really so entrepreneurial focused or status focused that they'd be willing to cozy up to the king? I think potentially. And people like this definitely existed, but they weren't the norm. Most people were just trying to exist. And serfdom was basically hard labor all day to feed yourself and your family and potentially make a few dollars on the side, or simply to do your duties for the village that you lived in to make sure that you had the protection that they'd offered you. So to answer the question of how do you get rich in the Bronze Age, I'd say your best bet is to get involved in the bronze industry in any way that you think you would excel the most. In my example, I wanted to master blacksmithing swords and use this to my advantage to essentially get government contracts, or at the very least, sell desirable artisan swords to rich merchants and political leaders, and ultimately get that bag. The Iron Age. What a time to be alive. During the Bronze Age, we experienced more development in 2,000 years than we did during the over 3 million years of human existence in the Stone Age. Due to this exponential growth, you would likely assume that this trend continued into the Iron Age, but that's not exactly the case. Like we mentioned in the previous video, the end of the Bronze Age was a rather rough time, and due to major situations that happened, which are honestly worthy of their own video, most of the world was left in a place where production, trade routes, literacy, and overall progress were either diminished or reduced, making the Bronze Age more or less of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of situation. That being said, it's not all doom and gloom because we're humans and we're Chads, and we ultimately figured it out. Obviously, just look at us now. But that leads us to the beginning of the Iron Age. We needed to rebuild, and we needed to do it now. The beginning of the Iron Age was very similar to the beginning of the Bronze Age, with the primary difference, of course, being the metal at play, which, you guessed it, was iron. Iron wasn't necessarily a stronger material, but it was more readily available and it was easier to produce, which helped facilitate a lot of progress. Which is why, if you're paying attention to the dates, you'll notice that the Iron Age was also much shorter than the Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age was much shorter than the Stone Age. The exponential growth is still continuing even after the bump in the road. Now, that's a nice underdog story and all, but how do we get rich? Like I mentioned in the last video, being rich in the Iron Age was not very different than being rich in the Bronze Age. And I hate to break it to you, getting rich in the Iron Age also wasn't very different than getting rich in the Bronze Age. But I'll still give you a new hypothetical in this new time period. Let's assume that once again, you're a healthy, able-bodied 18-year-old ready to start your life. The artisan sword company that your parents had founded has now gone Bronze Age bankrupt and they are dead. For the sake of this story, they just died too. They went broke and died. So now you're here, alone, looking to get that bag in the Iron Age. What do? Once again, you have 2 options. Get involved in emerging industries, in this case, the production of iron, or try to get as cozy as possible with the powers that be, which at this point in time isn't an easy task. So in this case, I'm becoming an iron mogul. With establishments growing and jobs becoming more or less of a thing, my plan is to find and own the best iron deposit my settlement and likely other settlements have ever seen. But here's the thing, if I'm just one guy looking around for iron deposits, I may not be that successful, and I may miss things. And even once I do find it, there's a lot of work to be done there. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'll need help. First thing I'll do is go to the nearest farm. I'm gonna try to round up as many farmers that I can find who are no longer interested in farming and looking for a better opportunity. At this point, everyone's been seeing the new and shiny iron tools and they know that they're expensive. And likely they're interested and want their own. And my proposal to them would be, join my team, help me find an iron deposit, let's mine it together, and with you, I will share the rewards. Realistically, the proposal is no money up front, but a lot of money down the line if you're willing to work with me. And once I have a good group of guys, we're ready to go. Day 1, we're looking, searching, scoundering, floundering, sleuthing, anything we can do to find iron deposits. Once this has been achieved, we begin the hard work, mining. We gather as much as we can and determine how good this vein of iron really is. And if we see potential, we set up camp. Once we begin mining, we begin either collaborating with an existing manufacturing facility or we build our own to be able to turn the raw materials into a usable iron to make tools, weapons, and once again, ornaments. Once we get a more refined process, we then begin to stockpile and finally sell our refined material. We could sell the raw material, but we also know that if we sell a more refined material, we can get more money. And from that point, we begin our journey. All of the men that were mining are now selling. Door to door, potentially. We are going to every blacksmith and offering them the best iron in the best condition with minimal work on their end. Just heat it and forge it. What more could you want? Ideally, once again, the leaders at B take notice and want to buy my iron, but I'm happy if even just the blacksmiths prefer mine. At this point, we begin to collect money and it's a beautiful system. In the Bronze Age, I wanted to make the swords, and in the Iron Age, I was the person selling the materials to those artisans. Is this a realistic plan? I highly doubt it. This oversimplified, trust me bro hypothetical is leaving out so many components. Specifically, all of the violence that would have potentially taken place either between my team, between settlements, between people in my settlement that wanted my iron deposits, and so many other things that could have potentially existed. I'm just now realizing that this video is basically what it was like to be an entrepreneur in every time period, which I guess makes sense because entrepreneurship and wealth typically go hand in hand. The medieval era. Now things are really heating up and we are in full swing of development. People are settled and civilization is making major strides. There is a very established class system and money is more important than ever. The richest people in the medieval era were the people that were closest to the powers that be, those being the nobility and the merchants that were able to sell products over very long distances. Both of these were extremely useful to the king and therefore paid very nicely. And considering the major wealth gap in the huge centralization of money and power, your best bet was to get money from the king, because most other people just didn't have it. During this time, spices, precious metals, and silk were extremely desirable materials, and I'm going to use those to my advantage once we get to the hypothetical. For my plan to get rich in the medieval era, I want to do something different. I'm done being an entrepreneur. I want to now become a criminal. And for this reason, I'll need to target merchants. You see, the nobility had most of their wealth come from the land that they owned, which was given to them from the monarch. And it's rather hard to steal land, at least not without a fight. So I think I'm better off stealing from the long distance merchants. In this time period, I am more motivated than ever to get my bag up because we are starting to see the early equivalent of modern luxuries. Large, beautiful castles, servants, comfy clothes, something that kind of resembles a toilet, concubines, jewel-encrusted stuff, and other fun stuff like that. So yeah, let's get rich. Although my plan may seem simple, with nations developing and with power becoming centralized, I am at greater risk than ever of being reprimanded for the crimes I'm about to commit. Because now there is rule, there is order, and I need to be very careful about how I go about breaking it. I'll start my journey once again like every other journey as an 18-year-old looking to build my life. Let's say that I was born into an established kingdom, into a regular poor family. My goal is to become a known member of society and a positive one at that. I want to be active in the church, helping those in need, and seen often within the community. But this will work in my favor for my malicious intention. My goal is to gain the trust specifically of the rich merchants doing long distance trade, because they 1, have the most money, and 2, are the most vulnerable. See, being a thief, I could try to pickpocket around my city, but eventually it's gonna catch up to me. And honestly, there's a cap to how much money I can make. Back to my trust with the merchants. My goal is for them to feel comfortable sharing their information with me, specifically when trade shipments are going out, what the shipments are, and where they are going to be. For example, imagine I just go around the city with a broom every so often, just out of my goodwill, but I always somehow happen to broom where the rich merchants are. This isn't by accident. I want to overhear them, and ideally, I want to gain information. If I'm sweeping right beside 2 rich merchants having a discussion outside and I overhear one of them telling the other one that they had a large shipment of spices just get delivered and they are currently days away from getting their large payment, I'm going to inquire. I may ask this merchant how the shipment went and where they shipped it and where they even got the spices. I'm going to pretend like I'm interested in the business, when in reality, I just want to know when's that money coming into town and what route is it going to take. Let's just assume that this merchant slips up and he accidentally tells me that his people always come in the back route to the kingdom and they always head home under the veil of night. At that point, I have all of the information I need. I will go about my day, and as soon as the sun starts to set, I will put on my dark cloak and begin my journey. I will begin my trek on the back trail, getting outside of the kingdom and closer to my reward. I'll likely go 10, 20, 30, maybe even 40 kilometers on the trail. Something far enough from my kingdom so nobody knows what's going on, but still not too far that I can't do it in one night. I have 2 options. I can either hide and sneak attack these people on the way back, or I could gain their attention in other ways. For this example, my strategy is tricking the merchants into stopping and thinking that I need help. I brought a second robe with me and I folded it in a way that made it look like it was a swaddled baby. I'm going to be sitting in the middle of the trail holding my baby, rocking back and forth, hysterically waiting for them. Once they arrive, I'm going to beg them for their help and tell them that they need to help save my baby. I am going to be inconsolable and overwhelming to them. They're going to want to leave me immediately. And fortunately, I don't need much time to distract them. Because the merchant didn't tell me who was carrying the gold and where it was held, pickpocketing here is useless, and my only option is to kill them. Because I have the agility and sword skills of an absolute ninja, I flawlessly cut them all in half and they die instantly. And with my expertly placed slices, the bag of gold and silver instantly reveals itself to me. I grab the loot, leave the men, and head back into my kingdom. I arrive the same night I left, I put my robe away, and in the morning, I start the nice side of my double life. Here's the problem with this situation. If money is going missing all the time and I, a poor person, all of a sudden becomes rich, people are going to ask questions. So I can't really spend my money, but that's okay. Because once I'm satisfied with the amount of money I have, I can leave my settlement and begin a new life. If I can travel far enough and go to places where I've never been heard of, which is likely the case if I'm just a locally known, gentle, poor person, in any new settlement I go to, I can tell them a rather convincing story that I am a wealthy merchant who was ran out of town by a bad gang and I'm just looking to have a peaceful life somewhere nice. Is this a likely or potentially even realistic situation? I highly doubt it, once again, but I think it's an actually pretty funny hypothetical of one way a rather evil person could get rich in the medieval era. And honestly, I would bet money that something like this happened at least once, and was probably more common than we think. Violence was common, robbery was everywhere, law only really existed inside of castle walls, and people were brutal. So to answer your question, how do you get rich in the medieval era? Well, there's plenty of ways, but if you're not born into money and you're not willing to put in the effort to become a successful merchant, I'd say your best bet is to go all Assassin's Creed and become the best thief you can absolutely be. The early modern era. At this point, we've gone through millions of years of history, and the early modern era is our last stop before the modern day. And the early modern era, although relatively short, is one of the most influential eras of all time, and is where we see the foundation set for the modern world that we live in today, in good ways and bad ways too. In the early modern era, wealth was driven by exploration, trade, and colonization. Nations and individuals who invested in voyages reaped enormous profits from new trade routes and new resources. Merchants are richer than ever, and now the early versions of bankers are also accumulating wealth through the emerging global trade. Like almost every other time period, owning land and engaging in agriculture is still extremely important. But with the continued growth of commerce, finance, and manufacturing, more and more opportunities are beginning to present themselves to, once again, get that bag. So we're in the early modern era. How are we gonna get rich? Well, we have two new options, exploration and colonization. And for the sake of my reputation, let's go with exploration. My goal as an explorer is going to be to build the absolute best team of cartographers, navigators, researchers, and writers, so I can not only establish new trade routes, but also make extra money by developing maps and documenting what I'm seeing on my journeys. Because during this point in time, a lot of the world was unmapped and undiscovered, at least to some people. I guess my first step would be to beg the king for a boat and a small loan. This won't be easy, but I'll tell him that I have the best cartographers, the best writers, the best captains, and the best people on my team to make sure that our voyages not only find new lands, but bring back artifacts, establish trade routes with the people that are there, if any, and that the places that we go are documented not only in map form, but in the written word. And if that doesn't convince the king for him to fund my journey, I don't know what will. So in this case, assuming he does, I now have a boat and a small loan of money. But there's one problem. All of those people that I told the king I had on my team, I don't have on my team. And I don't even have a team. So now I gotta get them. And during this time period, where do you think the best and the brightest would be? Do you think they would be the guy sitting on the side of the road drinking wine and ale? Likely not. They're likely in the government where I just got the boat and the loan. Now, of course, I can't ask the king for these people because then he'll know I'm lying. So I have to be a bit more creative. What I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the key players in the government, specifically for captains and cartographers, and I'm gonna go to them and tell them, hey, the king gave me a loan, a boat, and he told me that you have to come with me. Now, of course, he could verify this with the king, unless I told him a reason not to. I'm gonna tell these people that the king is mad at them. And I don't know why, but the king said that if he saw them again, he was going to have them executed. And for that reason, these people should come on this adventure with me. Not only to get out of the king's sight for a bit, but also to get back in the king's good graces. This may seem manipulative, and you're 100% right, but it's also, in this situation, my only option. And now, my house of cards is finally complete, and together, we set sail. On this boat, I am more or less useless, so I am trusting the captain and the cartographer with this entire operation, essentially. Fortunately, a lot of areas are simply unmapped, so I just tell the cartographer to tell the captain to go where we haven't gone before, at least where we don't have recorded evidence of going. And from that point, we're off. Even at this point in the story, we've done so much and risked so much just to even get here, and we haven't even made $1 yet, and we are still relatively poor. We have a loaned out ship, a team of people that we're deceiving, and debt to the government in the form of the loan. And if we're unable to find anything of substance, we're cooked. And my elaborate ruse is over. But because everything has kind of perfectly fallen into place in the story, let's continue that trend. And let's say on our first voyage, we discover the most amazing thing ever. What is it, you may ask? It's a remote, abandoned island where the richest pirate gangs hid all of their most valuable loot, including coins, artifacts, booty, and slightly used peg legs. At this point, I need to come clean. I told the guys, hey, you guys are all being lied to, and if you don't continue the lie with me, then we're all gonna die. The men agree, we get the loot, we go back home, and we do it again and again. and we all live happily ever after. That's just one hypothetical about how you could use exploration to your advantage to get rich in the early modern era. And in case you wanted to learn about how to use colonization to get rich, well, just read a history book. The modern era. Wow, guys, can't you believe it? I've been able to cover millions of years of history, and somehow I've made no mistakes and left out no information. Everything I've said has been completely accurate and not totally oversimplified, glossed over, uninformed, and almost entirely hypothetical. That's crazy. But now, here we are in the modern day. A time period you may be familiar with. I don't think I need to explain too much about what being rich in the present day looks like, but I'll give a quick example. If you want a negative example, I recommend going to our channel and watching this video about rich weirdos. But if you want some positive examples, rich people just like cool stuff. Big houses, big boats, fast cars. And if you're really rich, space travel and goth girlfriends. Now, getting into how you can get rich in the present day, the opportunities are honestly endless. If you're currently watching this looking for a way to get rich, I'm gonna give you a foolproof plan to make more money than you could ever even imagine. The first thing you're going to want to do is grow your hair. Get it as long as possible. The next step is to grow facial hair and get tattoos. This will come in handy. After this, you need to establish a wardrobe of white t-shirts and basketball shorts. And once you have the look, you can begin the work. I need you to every single day begin posting on YouTube. Talk about stuff. Talk about stuff you like. Talk about stuff you don't like. Talk about that time you were almost in a movie. Talk about anything. Over time, people are going to respect you, idolize you, love you, and ultimately need your opinion for just about anything. And people are gonna eat this up. And advertisers are gonna wanna sponsor you and put their ads on your video, making you rich. Oh, and now that you have the system of getting rich and the look, you're probably gonna need a name. How about Dry Ineffective or Polar Bear 1? Something along those lines. You guys pick. But in case that's not replicatable for you guys, here's another great idea on how to get rich in the present day. Step 1 is be born into a family where your parents see you more as an opportunity to make money than their flesh and blood. At that point, have parents that create a toy channel based around you. After a few videos of you opening toys that you're excited about, your parents will begin raking in the money. And as you grow up, you'll be like, I had a weird childhood, but my parents are rich. And I think I have money, maybe. And later down the line, we'll see what happens. So yeah, 2 extremely replicatable and honestly foolproof plans on how to get rich in the present day. And ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A step-by-step plan on how you can get rich in every time period. This video was extremely fun to make, and like your mother, it was rather fast and loose. Not too many facts, but a lot of funny hypotheticals based on different circumstances of different time periods. Hopefully you guys liked it. And if you guys haven't seen the first video, check it out. It's on screen. It focuses on the benefits you would get in each time period of being one of these wealthy individuals. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, trust me, bro.